Good day, everybody. My name is Leah. Welcome to My Life Without Limits podcast. I know Carlos sounds a little different. Usually Carlos is the one doing this introduction, but it is me at the moment. Carlos, our friend Carlos, is currently just on a bit of a break from work and everything. He is on a medical leave. He's just recouping from an illness and he's doing well. Everything is fine. But we wanted to keep the podcast going because there is a lot of great things to talk about and we want to keep the stories flowing. So we were very lucky to have a guest on season 1, episode 6, talking about the superpower of an invisible disability. I believe it was, with our friend Emily. And funny enough, full circle, things all come together in the end. Emily is now part of the Cerebral Palsy Alberta team and family. So she is stepping up and stepping in while Carlos is away. So we are going to welcome Emily here, who's going to co-host with me for a little while. Welcome, Emily.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Good. Why don't you just remind everybody a little bit about who you are, and then afterwards they can go back to season 1 and listen to episode 6 and hear your story. But for now, just give a little update on where you're at right now.
Sure, absolutely. So I recently stepped into the role at Cerebral Palsy Alberta as the volunteer coordinator. I absolutely love this role. It's super exciting. Before this role, I worked in various communications roles and capacities. I'm a 4-time founder, digital nomad, and disability rights advocate. I do some writing. I do some speaking on podcasts. I do all that kind of stuff. I'm working on my master's right now, talking about the language of disability and why we need spectrum-based language in disability communities like we have in gender and sexuality spectrums. So that's what my master's is in. And yeah, I'm here in Edmonton, which is unusual for me. Usually I'm in Mexico, so I'm excited to be here.
That's right. You are here in Edmonton with us. That's really great. We're glad to have you here and that you've stepped into this to help me out a little bit so we can keep the stories flowing. Today's topic is inclusive recreation, and very excited to have 2 awesome people here to talk about that with us. We have Kim from Between Friends out of the Calgary area. And then we've also got Ashley here from Calgary Adapted Hub, which I'm sure a lot of people know about. They're always doing great work. So why don't we just start with you, Kim? Maybe you could just let us know a little bit about you and Between Friends, and then we'll go to Ashley, and then we'll just talk about inclusive recreation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having Ashley and I. I have actually been with Between Friends for just over 18 years. I promise that doesn't make me the age that you think it does. But it's been a long time. And I started off as a camp counselor at our flagship Camp Bonaventure and have been with the organization in various capacities. I am a pandemic CEO, so I took over for our previous CEO in the heart of the pandemic when all of our programming was closed. So worked very closely with CP Alberta and Alberta Abilities Network on policy and all the different things that we looked to help our sector reopen. And Between Friends, we are a recreation and recreation and social service provider. So we do evening and weekend programs. We have a summer camp option. We have special event dances and activities. And then we also have an arm of our organization that does inclusive training at an individual level, group level, and at a policies and systems change level. So really happy to be here talking about inclusion and the Inclusive Week, and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Me too. Ashley, hello.
Thanks for the welcome, Leah and Emily. Emily, I think we could just spend this podcast talking about your masters, but we will.
Oh yeah, and we will. We'll do that again. We'll do it.
Yeah.
We'll stick to our topic plan for today, which is inclusive recreation, which fits very well in with the work that we do at the Calgary Adapted Hub. So I've had the pleasure of working as the director for the last 2 years, and the Calgary Adapted Hub has been in existence for the last 4 years. Also a pandemic story of the recognition of a lot of momentum happening throughout the city of Calgary and beyond around meaningful and quality sport and recreation for children and youth living with a disability. So there were many partners, community partners, organizational partners who wanted to advance what their services and programs look like, but also the culture and the ways in which they serve all individuals that come into their spaces and places and help build, again, definitely the recreation and sport opportunities, but certainly also the social well-being that comes with it. So the hub now has 12 core members and 60 plus community partners, many of which of those relationships are formed and developed through the Alberta Ability Network, the Inclusive Recreation Table. That's how Kim and I have the fortune of working together.
Yes.
And I know that there's a lot of impact that comes with collaboration. That's how we work at the Calgary Adapted and the same reason that we value the work that the Alberta Ability Network does. So very happy to be here, and yeah, very happy to chat about inclusive recreation.
I did not realize you guys had only been around 4 years. I could have sworn that you've been around forever. Because I mean, I'm on social media all the time and I feel like you guys were just always there. That's very interesting. That means you've done a lot of things right. Wow,
Well,
I didn't know that.
and you know what? I think that I missed kind of a critical piece to that introduction. A lot of that is due in part to the support that we've had from our key funding partner, which is Jumpstart Charities. And so
Yes,
without
right.
Jumpstart, we are powered by Jumpstart, and
Right.
without the strong mission, vision, and research that comes from an engine as strong and as directly around the impact for marginalized folks who want to recreate, I wouldn't be as far along as we are. So we're really grateful to Jumpstart.
Very good point. No, wow, that's very cool. Well, why don't we start with you, Emily, and just like, what does inclusive recreation mean to you as someone who is living with cerebral palsy, but also, like you said, you kind of can go between able-bodied and, you know, having a disability. So why don't we start with you talking a little bit about what it means to you to have inclusive recreation?
Absolutely. I think I struggle a lot with the binary of disability, the labels of disabled and able-bodied, because I've always felt not disabled enough to be disabled, not able-bodied enough to be able-bodied. However, at the same time, that obviously affords me a lot of privileges that other people don't have. So I can access able-bodied spaces, maybe disrupt those spaces when needed. And I can also really work with and for disabled people to empower them. In terms of inclusive recreation, my experience spans very wide. Living in kind of that gray zone of disability, I've had to kind of pave my own way in terms of what that looks like. And in general, for me, that looks like accessing able-bodied spaces and then taking individual adaptations as needed or with partners. So a good example of that is I dance salsa and bachata, and those are two partner style dances. And so it's kind of a round table rotation. You dance like all the follows, dance with all the leads. And as I come around, if there's new leads that I'm dancing with, they're going to have to get familiar with what I can do, what I can't do. And so I need to be able to communicate that very quickly. I also coach Special Olympics basketball. So I have a lot of experience in inclusive sport in that way. And I'm not the best basketball coach. So I'm kind of like the cheerleader coach, you know, like I'm just there to make sure everyone's having fun. And I'm there to take care of the social well-being aspect of inclusive recreation in that component. I also play pickleball. That's pretty hard to adapt, but we work around it. So yeah, I think in general, inclusive recreation to me is like equitable recreation, making sure that people really understand that at the individual level, differences can occur, but we're all achieving the same thing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The co-chair and visionary behind the Calgary Adapted Hub powered by Jumpstart is Dr. David Legg. And he often says that adapted physical activity or adapted physical education, inclusive recreation, whatever you want to call it for the purpose, is just good. physical education or good recreation, right? I love what you said, Emily, about the individual adaptation that's required. That's good coaching. That's good leadership. In so many ways, is getting to know the individual, what's the purpose or the reason behind why they want to participate, and then going from there. And so I think we often use that as encouragement to organizations who are sometimes afraid of what it might be like to be more inclusive in their practices, to just get started, get to know the participants, ask questions about what is meaningful for them, and then continue to grow your practice and increase participation from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things for me about inclusive recreation, so my life kind of came full circle, and in the last 6 months, my 9.5-year-old daughter was diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And I grew up playing fairly competitive ice hockey. My friends were my teammates. My parents' friends were the teammates' parents. Like, my whole life revolved around sport and recreation. And to now be a parent and watch my daughter struggle so much with the social aspect, which a lot of us take for granted coming from recreation. I know my husband and I talked so much about how we used to recreate, and you would just go outside and pick up a stick and a rock and you'd have fun. And now, especially for a little girl who's struggling to fit in socially, which thereby almost excludes her from recreating kind of naturally. And then on the flip side, when we do try and structure recreation for her and have to identify her as having autism, then we sometimes get the, well, this is not really the right place for her. Are we going to have issues with her? And for anyone that knows her, knows she's the easiest little thing to handle. But there's just, like Emily's, there's so much stigmatism around labels and all of this. And it all just comes back to recreation is such an important, integral part of all of our social development, which is why this Inclusive Recreation Day is just trying to bring awareness to how important we need recreation in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also think that we often think of recreation as sport. You mentioned this, and I mean, I have an extracurricular every night, Monday through Thursday. That's how I fill my time. I am a recreation queen. Like, I love it. And Monday night, we have a book club.
Yep.
And that absolutely is recreation.
Yep.
We're gathered. It's good for our social, mental, physical well-being. It lets us rest. It lets us build community. And it just happens. It wasn't planned. It wasn't intended that 3 people in the book club have autism. One of the members, we put forth the book for this month. One of the members went to go pick up the book from the bookstore, and she said, listen, I don't like the feeling of the pages. Could we change the book? It's sensory overload for me. Could we change the book? And we said, yeah, of course we can. We didn't even think twice about it. And that is also adapted recreation right there. It's just little things at the individual level that don't necessarily need to be planned.
Yes.
Which,
That's
Emily,
amazing. I got goosebumps from that because I love books, and because that's
and I think that maybe when Michelle and Elizabeth told us about your podcast, Leah, one of the things right away that I connected to is the name. Like, Life Without Limits is exactly that. And I think that recreation and sport, both personally and certainly professionally, has played a role in what does building community look like, right? And so I think that having the whether it's the themes that we've come up with for Inclusive Recreation Day, or it's the advocacy of encouraging folks to say, that book doesn't work for me. And knowing that there's other options, that is where the life without limits, beyond limits, exceeding limits, I think really comes from, and why we don't ever want recreation to be an extra, right? We want it to be on the table with conversations, much like the Alberta Ability Network does, but also brought up in families, in schools, in workplaces, that it's not an extra or nice to have. It is part of, it's a human right, and it's part of the human experience as well.
Great.
Yeah. And
I
it's
think
June 19th, right? Just want to, I guess, make sure everybody
June
know
19th.
that June 19th, and it started last year. Was that the first?
Yeah, last year it started off as we went big. We went for a week. And reining it in and making it more impactful and meaningful trying to play into the social media algorithm gods and really getting it across as many tables as possible by doing it on one specific day this year.
Right. Yes, that's right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I think the goal of the day, right, as Kim said, we harnessed it into one day this year, but back to that collective voice, or think about this again without limits, is that the intention of that day is not necessarily that everybody changes their practice or that we make anybody feel guilty for what they're not doing, but rather that we highlight and give language to the value that inclusive recreation has, and that by having collective voices that day celebrate it, we hope that maybe it gets to the next layer. It gets to an organization or a family or somebody who says, do I belong there? Like, I'm not sure. Tell me more. So maybe they hear something or they see something that makes them understand that inclusive recreation is truly that. It's for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest part of that is we had a lot of discussion about recreation and sport and how many of us, when you think of inclusive recreation, a lot of us think about Paralympic athletes, and you have a very strong vision of what this looks like. But it's so important in our messaging, in our graphics, exactly what Emily's saying. I'm in a book club. I volunteer as my recreation. I like to knit or sew. Those are all different ways to recreate. And I think the biggest thing is having people see themselves in this day and not say, well, I'm not going to be a Paralympic athlete, so I'm staying clear of this, but really making sure that it's clear that everybody recreates in some way or another, and everyone has the right to recreate. It's very simply part of our human experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that obviously our focus is on life without limits for people with disabilities, but also inclusive recreation goes beyond the limits of folks with disabilities and touches other interconnected, intersectional, and marginalized identities. Before the podcast started, I was chatting with Leah and I said, summer's coming up and the camping season is coming up. And I've noticed more, campers bringing out folks that wouldn't necessarily be introduced to camping due to barriers, due to lack of privilege. And I personally am seeing more and more people of color out camping, way more than I saw in my childhood. That is inclusive recreation too. I think that so many of the people that participate in inclusive or adapted recreation programs may have disabilities, but they also have intersectional identities, and we have to, and some of those are visible and some of those are invisible. And so ensuring that, inclusive recreation is inclusive to more and many marginalized communities is really important.
Emily, I always say I truly experience inclusive recreation at some of the inclusive playgrounds. So specifically the one that Jumpstart placed down in Bowness here in Calgary, Bowness Shoaldice area. You'll see grandparents playing with their grandchildren. You see care providers engaging in activity that otherwise would have them on the sidelines. You see children and youth of all ages. And again, that's a key objective of what we're trying to do, is to not only get folks involved in whether it is the music or the arts, sport and recreation, but have them sustain that throughout their lifespan, because we know there's so much benefit to that. And so I think, what maybe seems like it starts on the playground or in the schoolyard, I think can build the confidence and tools so that people can continue to engage or show up in spaces and say, hey, me too. So whether that's camping or whether that's at a dance class or a book club, regardless of what it is, I think a lot of it comes from the confidence and skills that are learned along the way as well.
And I think that one of the things that we played with a lot is, and I know Ashley and I have this conversation quite a bit, is inclusive and adaptive. And they're very similar words and they have a lot of similar undertones, but we really wanted to focus on the inclusive piece of recreation and not necessarily just the adaptive. And I think what Ashley's speaking of is really that, the inclusive of, it doesn't matter what gender you are, it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter what your age is, it doesn't matter anything. It's inclusive to anyone who wants to participate. Where when we start looking at simply adaptive recreation, it means that there's an actual tool or a change that is happening. And so we really wanted to lend this towards anybody who wants to recreate can.
Yes. And do you think it's important to do these days, like we have Red Shirt Day coming up where we talk about accessibility and inclusion already? Do you think it's important to take that little part of the recreational part out and have its own shining light? Because do you find that when people talk about just general accessibility and inclusion, that sometimes recreation gets missed, or, you know, mental health and things that you do for your mental well-being gets missed a little bit in those talks?
I have to give, I am probably I talk about this a lot. So between friends, we do a ton of, like, we live in the recreation space, and we actually lost a major funder of our organization because they stated that recreation does not support mental health. And it is the constant battle that we are fighting to prove to, you know, the government, the funders, the big people, that recreation is the fundamental base of all mental health, which I thought we all learned during the pandemic. I think we very quickly forgot what isolation truly feels like, apparently. But I sit on another committee, which is Planet Youth through the United Way. And I was actually just talking with Ashley about this morning. And what they're doing is piloting different programs in 4 or 5 communities in Calgary that are underserved. And what every kid is coming back with is they need more access to recreation, whether that's from a fee perspective. Recreation can be expensive, whether it's transportation, location, or simply inclusivity, that they don't feel like it's a place where they belong. And so it seems like inclusive recreation is at the top of everyone's agenda, yet the link is still missing to mental health. And I think that this day is really trying to bring light to how important recreation is for each of us to live happy and healthy lives.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think both of you have kind of hinted at this a little bit, but can you talk about some of the themes perhaps that you've determined for Inclusive Recreation Day?
Sure, and I think Emily will use that as well to encourage anybody who's listening to this in the lead up. We wanted to tape this podcast before June 19th, because if any of these themes resonate with you and you want to use them in your own, whether, you know, social media, newsletters, any kind of communications with your network, we would encourage you to do so. Again, back to the unified messaging. So Kim, I'll kick it off with number 1. Recreation is a right, not a privilege.
Yeah. Recreation is a key contributor to mental and social well-being.
Then in line here with the podcast, recreation knows no limits.
It's my favorite.
No biases, right?
No, not at all.
And recreation is part of the human experience.
Yes. Yes. And I'm starting to understand that more because of you guys, because we are incorporating, talking about, you know, a book club being part of recreation, and knitting, because I would normally say, oh, I'm not sporty. And I did play pickleball for a little bit, but I'm definitely like an indoor cat who likes to knit, do puzzles. But you know what? Thank you for, you know, making me realize that I do. That's what I do for recreation, even though it's at home on my own where I like to be. It's still part of it.
I am the biggest introvert out there. I am with you. I love my home. I love my cozy life. But that's how we choose to recreate. And then that's perfect.
And it's okay.
So Inclusive Recreation Day as well is part of another movement of recreation in the province. So Alberta proclaims June as Parks and Recreation Month. So the leadership for that is through Alberta Recreation and Parks Association. And so we will be collaborating with them to not only celebrate Inclusive Recreation Day, but also to celebrate other things that happen in June, including Indigenous History Month, Pride, and some of the other, again, awareness and advocacy that can go on around not only the value of parks and recreation, but certainly parks and recreation for other equity deserving groups as well.
Yeah, and I'm excited about that because, of course, I'll be doing a lot of the social media for Alberta Ability Network and putting out some great videos that you guys have helped. And I think it was, there was another organization that sent us some videos too. Disability Action Hall, I think it was.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes, got some great videos and a lot of key messages to put out. So I'm hoping everybody will stay attuned to social media for all of that.
Well, and I think, Leah, that's probably the big one here. You know, so it's easy for me to talk about my daughter. It's easy for you and Ashley to talk about our organizations, but to hear it from people like Emily, to hear it from those in our community who are talking about what recreation means to them, I think those videos are so much more impactful than we could ever share with our community. And so I would really recommend people taking a peek at some of those videos that have been submitted, because they're life-changing to hear what simple little pieces make these people just so happy in their day-to-day.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think,
oh, sorry.
No, I think expanding on that as well is, you know, I'm a glass half full kind of person. And so it's fun to come on here and to share the highlights, and certainly to add something that I believe so fully and truly has impact in our communities. But we're not ignorant to the fact that there's still barriers. There's a lot of gaps.
Of course, yeah.
And that the families, the individuals, the children and youth, the adults or young adults kind of going into adulthood and seeking what recreation continues to look like for them, that there can be some of those obstacles along the way. And so the day also holds a really big importance, as does why we continue to host the Inclusive Recreation Table as part of the Alberta Ability Network. So that we hear from the community about what do we need to do as organizations so that we can continue to advance the movement of inclusive recreation. We know it's going to take a lot of organizations to help to fill those gaps, both locally, like in the centers that we all like reside in, but definitely into the rural communities as well. And so again, that's part of the reach, right? And Kim and her organization are expanding more rurally as the organization grows. But I think that's really a call or an ask to the community to continue to provide their voice throughout the year, not just on Inclusive Recreation Day.
Yes, yes. When CP Alberta expanded, and we got a call from a mom in Valley View, Alberta, who was like, hey, you know, they have got a huge community of kids out there with cerebral palsy and other disabilities. And it was like, they were like, hey, can, you know, you help bring some programs. And so we've got a really great, you know, equine therapy program there and aquatherapy, and which is now turning into swim. And it was like, the way the community came together to give, you know, resources and the spaces and stuff, it was like, they needed it. And it was huge. Like the demand out there was like, we hear you. Calling from all the way there.
Well, and I think that's one of the privileges that a lot of us organizations do have to check, is that we do operate in these big city centers that have money and facilities and have come kind of full circle in their advocacy. I mean, Adapted Hub, to hear how many partners you have, that's amazing that there's that many organizations that want to be inclusive. But when you start talking about, you know, rural Alberta and small town, I live in Carstairs, and I mean, our arena is, I guess, kind of accessible, if you will. They put a ramp in to the first level, but can you go up to the dance studio? No. Can you go do these things? No. And it's just because, again, there's a lot of money involved. A lot of the conversation has always been, well, there's not that many people who would need it here. But I think the big thing for this day is, if you can change one person, shouldn't that be enough? I have friends, her daughter can't go watch the son play hockey because the daughter uses a wheelchair and where they go is not accessible. Why can't she go support her sibling? Or even as we, between friends, expands into Red Deer, we talk to a lot of people, and their first comment is, my child's too disabled to go to a camp. And that's just what they've been told over and over. And it's amazing how much we have to teach and educate people that it's okay. You can come to these camps. There is a place for you. We are changing the narrative in these communities to make it more accessible. And I think that's a big piece of this Inclusive Recreation Day. I know, Leah, you put together a wonderful little blog post that a lot of us will be sharing about what are we doing? Okay, so now we've proclaimed it Recreation Day. What are we
Yes.
doing? How are we, actioning this? And so things like looking at your facility and saying, can anybody who want to come here, come here?
Yeah.
Looking at programming. It's not that hard to make a couple adaptations. It's not hard to reach out to disability serving organizations and ask for support or training or any of those stuff. What can be our inclusive practices? How can we engage the community to support every member of our community? And I think the biggest one is, what are those accessibility features? What are those little things that could make Emily's life easier so that she doesn't have to worry about those adaptations, that they're already there?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you bring up someone having the barrier of being too disabled. That's a common one, but I think another common one that people often forget is lots of people, including myself, have been getting, you're not disabled enough, so go figure it out. Like I'm not even able to receive disability tax credit. Like there's all these things that there's barriers to being too disabled, not disabled enough.
You have to fit in this perfect government box. Right.
There's millions of people around the world that fit into this gray zone, yet we don't have language for the gray zone. So catch me in 10 years after my PhD, I'll have designed the language for the gray zone. But until then, making spaces accessible benefits everyone. My absolute favorite example of this is, the accessible button on the outside of a door so that the door opens automatically, right? Lots of people with disabilities will use these buttons to open the door. But then, you have the mom with 3 little kids and 14 bags of groceries, and she walks to the apartment building and she uses her elbow and she goes, boop, and she presses it and she walks in. Or the gym bro that just spent 3 hours at the gym and presses because he doesn't want to do 6 more flights of stairs. He doesn't think about the elevator. She doesn't think about that accessible button. Making spaces accessible benefits everyone. And I think if we can transfer that to recreation, to understand that making recreation accessible and inclusive for everyone benefits everyone. The leads that I dance with have said time and time again that they are better dancers because they have danced with me, because they know how to work with unique bodies, they know how to work with unique movements. So then when someone perhaps able-bodied comes along, then they're nice and fluid. They know how to manage a unique body. So I think inclusive recreation really isn't just for, someone that's too disabled, or someone that's not disabled enough, or someone that's marginalized, or someone that doesn't have the privileges to access. Inclusive recreation really does benefit us all.
I agree, Emily. And one of the things I often say to organizations that we're working with is you're already working with probably 25-30% of people who experience disability. So you can decide, I hope it's a yes, but as an organization, you decide if you're going to do that in a really meaningful way. Meaning you train your staff, you set policies and procedures to be most supportive to people regardless of their uniqueness or additional support needs that they may have. But either way, folks are coming to your spaces. So now it's time to decide, what are we going to do, and what foundation are we going to stand on to make that really positive experience? Because either way, you're either going to do it and do it right, or you're going to do it and turn and not really look at what's possible to be done from an inclusive way.
And I might need, Emily, you're the PhD student, so you might need to correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it something like 1/4 of our population will experience a disability at some point in their lives?
Yeah. And including like mental illness and stuff, we're getting into the 40+ percentage.
Yes, right? Yes.
And I mean, at our organization, we saw it firsthand. We have a young gentleman, he works for us. His mom had a stroke. She was a very healthy lady. She doesn't identify as having a disability. Now she's navigating the world after a stroke and needing adaptations and changes. This is not something for people who are born a certain way or who have experienced life altering. At some point, the majority of us will need some sort of inclusivity around recreation, some sort of adaptation. And I think that's why it's so important for us to bring awareness, because today you might be that able-bodied, you know, white male living in the perfect little world. And at some point you may need the support of what we're trying to change.
We're in Alberta. We are all one slip away on the icy sidewalk or the stairs. That's what I've said a million times on this podcast.
Yeah.
You know, we're all one slip away from, having to experience that. And
so training always comes up as a, and Kim, I know your organization deals with this as well, as organizations and individuals. There's a bunch of amazing individuals that make up these organizations. So I don't want to be, to miss that, but often training comes up as a barrier, saying, if I knew more, then maybe I'd feel more ready to act. And so we could actually dissect that as far as like a thought pattern. But either way, what we want to do is minimize that intention to learn or the desire to learn with having something available. And so this week, actually, we just released, thanks to the support of our partners, some e-modules that can be conversation starters and an intro to different topics, so that they can happen at a staff meeting, they can happen in staff training, and we've used local experts so that then those organizations may choose to continue to work with some of those folks to enhance the learning. So Kim and her team have prepared one on recreation, inclusion, leadership. Our friends at the Autism Asperger Friendship Society have done one on unlocking the potential of neurodiverse participants. And Alberta Health Services has done one with us on mental health literacy. And then we also have a webinar that's taped around intro to inclusion. So those are available to any organization who may be saying, okay, I only have about 45 minutes to get this conversation started, but we don't want to not have the conversation. And sometimes by the time you book the training, get everybody in the same room and we get going, it's 3 or 4 or 5 months down the road. And so what we want to be able to do is say, no, these are in your toolkit and they're available to use. Let's start that process as people come on board or as teams continue to meet and expand their knowledge around supporting inclusive recreation.
And I would say the next level of that, so like Ashley said, so we supported with one of their modules, and that's really that introductory level. But kind of what we do as a community service is really looking at that policies and systems change. So working with organizations that are not traditionally disability serving organizations and really saying, how do we get you to a place where anybody with any disability could participate in your programs? And organizations like Between Friends or CP Alberta, we don't need to exist because inclusion is happening. We don't need to facilitate it. And so for us, it's really going above and beyond that training and really looking at those policies and that leadership level. And so for us, Emily mentioned it earlier, is looking at that intersectionality. So we're working with places like the Center for Sexuality in Misconawa, and what is the intersectionality between people's identities and how does disability play into that? And then how do we create community that accepts everybody for who they are? And so this day is just like that little piece of the pie that hopefully sparks more for people to go, okay, I want to be a part of this. What should I do next? And it's going to places like the Alberta Abilities Network, Calgary Adapted Hub, CP Alberta, Between Friends, whoever that is, whoever your next step is, we will all find you the right place to go. But it's that initial, what can I do differently after today? And I think that's the biggest piece to take away.
Yep. June 19th.
Yep.
I wish it was acceptable for podcast episodes to be like 4 hours long. It's like every episode we're like, oh my God, we're going to have you back because there's so much more to talk about. And I just like how you guys are chatting and the conversation is flowing so good, but I know that we all have things that we need to do.
Well, Leah, you started this with a simple question of what is inclusive recreation.
Yep.
And you know, words like
did we even answer it at any point?
I don't know. Who knows?
Words like joy come to mind for me when I
Yeah.
think about that. But I think what I would encourage to anybody listening, or even if you just stumble upon a few minutes of this conversation today, is to continue to have that conversation. Have it with your families, have it with your friends, have it in the organizations that you're with, because I think if we don't give voice to it,
Yes.
it again gets pushed off to the side. So so that question is, it's short and sweet, but I think that if we continue to ask those questions, that's where we will continue to develop more inclusive communities that see recreation as part of the human experience.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like, you know, I know for Between Friends, all of our work is around children and adults with disabilities, but we very well know we haven't arrived at the answer. We are constantly growing and learning. And that's okay. That's okay for someone to say, you know, we're on our journey. We're not at the end of it, but that's okay. I just want to be on the journey. And so that, I think really that's the big piece of all of this is where are you today? Where do you want to find yourself in the future? And then how do you get there?
Yes. Right? That I like that. And it's okay. Because I know I'm learning, you know, like just through this podcast, I learn a lot about, you know, the differences, you know, me being able-bodied, but then any limitations I might put on myself when we talk about life without limits. And it's usually when people talk about that, it's the outside, you know, limitations. But both of you do work in helping people live their life without limits. But Ashley and Kim, do you guys feel you live your life without limits?
Ooh, that's a big question. I'll piggyback, or I'll start my answer. I think I could answer that in a bunch of different ways, but something Kim just said, I think comes with maturity, with having incredible colleagues and mentors and friends around all the time, is the desire to keep learning. And so I think life without limits for me is so much about that, is to know that life won't be without challenge or without hiccup or obstacle along the way, but that it's so much about who you're doing life with that makes it not only without limits, but helps to, again, I'll say the word joy again, but to find learning, opportunity, connection through those limits. So I think that, I think the desire to learn and continue to grow with good people is how I choose to live my life. I'm so grateful for that. And that does help reduce the limits that are placed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I'm on a journey without limits. I find myself, I'm typically like a very regimented linear human, and having a little person in my life who is taking me on a journey without limits is challenging me. I mean, I used to be the person who would go to Disneyland with a manual of like, we're going to be on this ride at this time and this ride at this time, and that is just not how our life works anymore. So I am on a journey of living without limits right now.
Isn't that exciting?
Actually, it is. It was very scary in the beginning, very scary. But I'm actually, as Ashley, I'm enjoying it. It's fun.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. And I know you, Emily,
live your best mom. Yeah.
Yeah, Emily's like the ultimate without limits. Like we can all learn something from Emily. I don't know how your social battery must be like this big. You do stuff every day.
I was gonna say you have time to read a book before a book club. Like I don't.
I spark notes it. Let's be honest. I'm just there for the social interaction.
Audiobooks and a cheese board are the only things.
I was gonna say, I go for the snacks.
I don't think any book club really talks about the book for very long, to be honest.
That's true. That's very true. It's just an excuse. Yes, I do wish we could talk more, but I think we've said a lot, and I think I'm excited for people to see what we're doing on June 19th, and I'll put in the show notes. Everybody can look, and we'll have links to all of your organizations to see what you guys are doing, and social media, so people can stay tuned and see all these great videos we're going to be putting out, and just all the stuff that's going to be going out. And we hope everybody shares it and just gets the conversations going, which would be really great.
Be curious.
For being here. Is there
And
any last words you'd like to add?
Just both. Yeah, it was great to meet you both, Leah and Emily.
You too.
Likewise.
Yeah. I was before we all logged in, I was saying to Leah, I think I've seen her name for the last couple of
I know.
years, and I was like, it's finally nice to put a face. This is amazing.
I know. Yeah, it's been 11 years with CP
Yeah.
Alberta, and then just a little bit more involved the last little bit with Anne than I was before. But I know I see everything that's going on, and it's great work that is starting to happen. It's really ramping up, and it's really, really nice to see. No, this has been great. So don't leave right away. When we say our goodbyes, stay on for a minute, and then we'll have our-
Amazing.
Emily, thank you for joining for this episode and future ones that are going to come up.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I think this is, see, I knew you were good at this. I knew you would be good for this.
Yeah. And Emily, when you're done, let's get back together because I would love to hear more about your thesis.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to be incredible. So I guess I have to be like Carlos. Usually he just says, thank you very much. And please remember to live your life without limits. Thank you. Okay, we're good.